Minus 52 degrees, that's not a weather report, that's a death sentence. And Colonel James Harrett knew exactly what it meant. He'd survived 3 combat deployments, 2 helicopter crashes, 31 years of military service in some of the most hostile environments on the planet. He'd watched buildings collapse in Afghanistan. He'd watched bridges fail in Iraq. He'd watched men make structural decisions under pressure that cost lives. But standing on that frozen Alaskan ridge, staring at the caved-in wreckage of his own cabin walls split open, roof crushed under 8 feet of packed ice, every pipe burst, every board cracked, he felt something he hadn't felt since his first deployment, helpless a decorated Army colonel, broken by winter. Most men his age would have packed it in, driven south, found a warm apartment somewhere, maybe Scottsdale or Tampa, spent the rest of their days on a porch watching other people's weather. But James Harrett was not built that way. Never had been, because in 31 years of military engineering, he had learned one truth above all others. When a structure fails, you don't abandon the mission. You study the failure. Then you build something better. So he walked away from the wreckage, left it for the snow to swallow. And he spent the next 6 months doing what every great military engineer does after a catastrophic failure. He went back to the beginning. James grew up in rural Montana, youngest of 4 brothers, in a house his father built with his own hands from timber cut off their own land. Before he could multiply fractions, he knew how it behaved. He knew spruce held heat differently than pine. He knew green logs chinked differently than seasoned ones. He knew that a poorly fitted joint didn't just look bad. It bled warmth like an open wound in the dead of winter. His grandfather was a logger. His father was a carpenter. And James absorbed everything both of them knew before he ever set foot in a classroom. He joined the Army at 19, became a combat engineer. Not infantry, not artillery. The men who actually build things under fire. Bridges, fortifications, field shelters, runway repairs in the desert at 2 in the morning. He rose through the ranks not by being loud, not by politics, but by being the man who solved the problem when everyone else was still arguing about it. Desert, jungle, Arctic, it didn't matter. James Harrett built things that held. He retired at 50 as a full colonel, chest full of medals he never talked about, and he had exactly one plan. Go to Alaska, build something permanent, live completely on his own terms. The first cabin was his mistake. He admitted it freely without ego, the way a real engineer admits failure. Not with shame, but as data. He built it the traditional way because he was in a hurry, and tradition is always faster than innovation. Standard notch log construction, single wall, metal roof, with stove in the center. It looked exactly like every off-grid homestead cabin on every wilderness calendar you've ever seen hanging in a garage. And it failed exactly the way those cabins fail when winter stops being romantic and starts being real. The walls conducted cold straight through. The roof collected weight until the structure groaned. The 90-degree corners, those right angles that feel so natural to build, so satisfying to square off, became cold traps, dead pockets where frost crept inward faster than the stove could push back. By January of his first full winter, James was burning firewood 16 hours a day just to hold 58 degrees inside. By February, a structural crack had split the north wall. By March, a section of the roof had partially folded inward under the weight of accumulated ice and snow. He stood inside what remained, watched frost crystals forming on the interior wall logs, and made a decision. He was going to solve this problem permanently. Not patch it, not insulate over it, not add a second stove. Solve it from the ground up the way a military engineer solved a problem, by understanding physics first and letting the design follow. He set up a wall tent, moved into it for the summer, and he spent every single day reading, calculating, sketching, and reviewing thermal data from military Arctic construction archives that most civilians didn't even know existed. The question he kept returning to was simple and ruthless. Where does the heat go? Because heat is not magic. It doesn't disappear. It moves. And in a structure, every BTU that escapes your walls is a tactical defeat. He'd been losing thousands of them every hour. He needed to know exactly where, exactly how, and exactly what shape would stop it. The answer, when it finally emerged from weeks of calculation, was almost insultingly obvious. Flat surfaces radiate heat outward in all directions equally. Right-angle corners concentrate cold air and create dead zones where warm air circulation cannot reach. Heavy flat roofs under snow load compress whatever insulation exists beneath them, reducing its effectiveness exactly when the temperature demands maximum performance. And single-wall construction, no matter how thick the logs, cannot buffer the temperature differential between a -40 exterior and a 70-degree interior without demanding enormous, continuous energy input. He needed a different shape, a shape that eliminated corners, a shape that shed snow load automatically, a shape that created natural warm air circulation inside rather than fighting against the physics of how heat moves. He needed a curve. James had worked around Quonset huts for 3 decades without ever thinking deeply about them. They were everywhere in military logistics, squat, arched, corrugated steel structures, ubiquitous and unglamorous. First designed for the U.S. Navy in 1941 at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, built to be crated. Shipped anywhere on Earth, assembled by 2 men with basic tools in under a weekend, and left standing in whatever weather that location produced. The arch came from a principle every structural engineer understands. A curved form distributes load along its entire surface, rather than concentrating stress at corners and ridge lines. Snow doesn't accumulate. It slides. Wind pressure doesn't hammer a flat face. It wraps around and dissipates. And internally, the curved ceiling does something a flat ceiling structurally cannot. It creates a convection loop. Heat rises. Everyone knows that. But in a flat ceilinged room, that rising heat pools uselessly at the top, pressed against the surface furthest from where humans live, radiating out through the roof while the floor stays cold. In an arched ceiling, rising heat follows a curve. It rolls back down the sides, returns to the living level, recirculates continuously. You extract dramatically more warmth from the same amount of fuel, not because you made more heat, because you stopped throwing it away. But bare corrugated steel had its own brutal problem. Metal conducts temperature in both directions without mercy. A steel Quonset hut in summer becomes an oven, in winter a refrigerator. The military solution was foam insulation sprayed on the interior. Functional, fast, but thermally shallow. Foam resists heat transfer. It doesn't store it. James wanted thermal mass, material that doesn't just slow heat loss, but absorbs thermal energy and holds it, charges up during active heating, and releases it slowly to the cold hours when the fire burns low. Material he knew intimately from a lifetime of working with it. He wanted logs. And the moment those two ideas connected, steel arch outside, log wall inside, the entire design locked into place with the kind of clarity that only comes after months of relentless focused thought, not inspiration. Conclusion, the result of following physics wherever it led without flinching. 3 layers, 3 distinct thermal functions. 1 integrated system. The outer corrugated steel arch handles the physical world. Wind load, snow load, rain, UV radiation, impact. It is the armor. Nothing breaches it. Behind that armor, a deliberate air gap of 4 to 6 inches, dead, sealed air, which is among the most effective insulating materials in existence, requiring no manufacturing, no shipping, no cost beyond the intention to create it. And behind that gap, the inner spruce log wall, the thermal engine of the entire structure. Logs of sufficient thickness store enormous quantities of heat. They absorb warmth from the stove through the day, through the night. While the fire sleeps, those logs release that stored energy back into the living space slowly and evenly. The way stone holds the sun's heat long after sunset. The building becomes a thermal battery. It charges. It discharges. It maintains. He sourced a used Quonset arch, 20 feet wide, 32 feet long, from a decommissioned military storage facility 300 miles south, for $100. $200 more to haul it north on a flatbed. $600 for the bones of a structure that would outperform every cabin within 100 miles. The foundation took 3 weeks working alone. Concrete was not an option. Permafrost and the freeze-thaw cycle will leave a concrete slab within 2 winters, cracking it, tilting it, gradually destroying anything built on top of it. James used treated timber pilings, 12 of them, each 6 to 8 inches in diameter, drilled 6 feet down past the frost line, connected by heavy cross beams forming a platform. The structure sits elevated above the ground, allowing cold air to pass beneath rather than conduct upward through the floor, and free to make microscopic seasonal adjustments as the earth moves beneath it without transferring that movement to the walls above. The arch went up in a weekend. His youngest son drove 4 hours north from Fairbanks to help. Corrugated Quonset panels bolt together in sequential curved sections, each one locking to the last, the arch building itself as you work outward from the center. By Sunday evening it stood complete. James walked inside the bare steel shell, heard his voice echo off the curve, and felt, for the first time since the first cabin collapsed, that the problem was solvable. The interior log work took 8 weeks. Every log was hand-milled from spruce, fell within 2 miles of the site. James cut them himself, limbed them, ran them through a small portable Alaskan mill he'd trailered in, stickered and stacked them through the summer to season in open air. By September, he was fitting them against the interior curve of the arch, notching, adjusting, fitting each piece by hand, the same patient process his father had taught him on Montana fence lines 40 years earlier, now translated into something his father could never have imagined. The chinking between logs, the sealant that closes every gap against air infiltration, was not the standard foam and acrylic most modern builders use. James had spent weeks researching historical Scandinavian construction records, buildings that stood for 400 years in climates comparable to interior Alaska. He found a traditional recipe, hydraulic lime mortar mixed with chopped sheep's wool fiber. The wool compresses into irregular gaps and creates a seal that flexes with the seasonal expansion and contraction of the logs without cracking open. It breathes slightly, preventing moisture buildup inside the wall assembly. It has worked in northern European buildings since the 15th century. It worked here. Then he built the airlock. The smaller log structure attached to the right side of the main arch is not a mudroom. It is not a storage shed. It is a precision thermal buffer, an airlock, functionally identical to what you find on Arctic research stations and space habitats. You enter the outer door, close it completely behind you, then open the inner door to the main structure. At no point are both doors open simultaneously. At no point does exterior air make direct contact with the interior of the arch. James calculated from military thermal management data that this single feature reduces interior heat loss during entries and exits by approximately 20%. Over a full Alaskan winter, that equals roughly 3 cords of firewood saved. At current prices in rural Alaska, that is more than $600 in fuel annually, recovered every single year from one small attached room with 2 doors. The wood stove inside is not exotic. Mid-size cast iron, standard commercial unit. But because of the thermal mass of the log interior, the passive heat retention of the double wall system, and the reduced infiltration loss of the airlock, it operates at roughly 40% of the output required to heat a comparable single wall structure. James loads it once in the morning. The logs absorb that heat. The arch circulates it. The fire burns down to coals by early afternoon. The walls keep radiating. By midnight, interior temperature has dropped perhaps 4 degrees from its daytime peak. By dawn, it is still above 65 degrees. He lit the stove once. The building did the rest. Power comes from a 400-watt solar array mounted on a south-facing ground frame positioned away from the building. Roof mounting in serious snow country means spending half your life clearing panels instead of living. The array feeds a battery bank that runs lights, a chest freezer, a ham radio, and a laptop. Nothing wasteful. Everyone accounted for. Water comes from a buried polycistern sunk below frost line, insulated with rigid foam board, gravity-fed by hand pumped to the kitchen. The passive warmth radiating from the structure keeps the supply line above freezing without heat tape, without electricity, without any active system whatsoever. Gray water routes to a leach field positioned in the building's heat shadow, the zone of marginally warmer ground that exists on the downhill side of any heated structure sitting on frozen earth. Ventilation is managed by a homemade heat recovery ventilator, 2 insulated ducts running in opposite directions through a salvaged commercial HRV heat exchange core. Outgoing stale warm interior air passes the incoming fresh cold exterior air through that core and preheats it before it ever enters the living space. On a -40 day, Incoming air arrives at the interior already pre-warmed to approximately 20 degrees above outside temperature. The stove barely notices it. On the coldest recorded day of James's first full winter in the new structure, minus 54 degrees Fahrenheit outside, sustained across 18 continuous hours, the interior temperature never dropped below 61 degrees. That measurement was taken during a deliberate 6-hour period with no active fire. A standard log cabin tested under identical conditions by researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks lost heat at a rate requiring continuous active heating just to maintain 45 degrees interior temperature. The Quonset log hybrid lost heat at less than a third of that rate, 65 degrees warmer. Not an estimate, not a marketing claim, a measured, documented, repeatable thermal result produced by physics operating exactly as James designed it to. He has lived in the structure through 4 complete Alaskan winters. The total maintenance record in that time is as follows: 1 door hinge replaced, 1 small section of chinking near the north airlock wall refreshed, 1 adjustment to the HRV ducting in year 2. That is everything. The galvanized steel arch, specified to marine environment standards, shows 0 corrosion. The interior log wall shows no checking or structural cracking beyond normal seasonal surface behavior. The foundation pilings have not moved measurably in 4 years of freeze-thaw cycling. In summer, a small greenhouse clips onto the south face of the arch using the original bolt pattern of the Quonset panels. James grows tomatoes, kale, and herbs from May through September. He bakes bread in a cast iron Dutch oven on the same stove that heats the building. He reads in the evenings. He tracks weather systems on shortwave radio with the same disciplined attention he once gave to tracking operational threats. He is, by any honest assessment, exactly where he intended to be when he retired. But what Colonel James Harrett built on that Alaskan ridge is larger than one man's retirement plan. It is a proof of concept that the engineering solutions to extreme cold living were never missing. They existed in declassified military construction archives. They existed in Scandinavian building traditions stretching back for centuries. They existed in the basic physics of curves, thermal mass, and dead air that architects and off-grid builders have systematically ignored in favor of the familiar flat wall and a comfortable right angle. The first cabin failed because it was built around how a cabin is supposed to look. The second structure was built entirely around how heat moves. That single shift in design philosophy, from appearance to physics, produced 65 degrees of difference. A retired officer, 1 catastrophic failure, 6 months of calculation, $800 in salvaged steel, 8 weeks of fitting logs by hand. That is a complete material list for the warmest off-grid structure in the region. The arch is glowing right now against the Alaskan dark. Snow is building silently against the foundation pilings. The temperature outside is falling past minus 30 and still dropping. Inside, Colonel James Harrett is reading by lamplight, warm, completely unbothered, drinking coffee he heated on a stove he lit once this morning. The cold that destroyed his first cabin is pressing against the steel arch from every direction. The arch doesn't notice. 65 degrees warmer than everything around it. Built by one man. Built from physics. Built to last. Built by a soldier who spent 31 years learning that the best structures don't fight their environment. They understand it.